Imagine a fairy tale. A beautiful princess from a powerful kingdom marries a handsome prince, destined to be king. She is beloved, admired, and on the track to becoming one of the most influential women in the world. She has it all: the crown, the love of a king, and the promise of a glorious future. Now, imagine that fairy tale twisting into a nightmare so grotesque, so foul, that the very air in the royal palace becomes unbreathable. Imagine a stench so powerful it silences the entire royal court, a stench of decay, emanating from the queen herself, while she is still alive. This isn't a work of fiction. This is the gut-wrenching true story of a queen whose tragic end was the stuff of nightmares, a tale of a horrifying fall from grace that was as literal as it was swift. Stick with us as we uncover the story of the rotting princess, whose final days became one of history's most ghastly secrets. Our story begins with a princess who seemed destined for greatness, Isabella of Aragon. Born in 1247, she was the daughter of King James I of Aragon, a formidable ruler known as the Conqueror. From birth, Isabella was a pawn in the grand game of European politics, but she was a cherished and valuable one. She was known for her beauty, her piety, and her sharp intellect. In an era where a royal daughter's primary value was her marriage prospects, Isabella was a prize. The suitor who won her hand was none other than the future king of France, Philip. Their marriage in 1262 was a major political event, uniting two of Europe's most powerful Catholic kingdoms. For the young Isabella, it was the start of a new life. She moved to the glittering French court, a world of lavish feasts, intricate etiquette, and constant political maneuvering. By all accounts, she adapted beautifully. She was a popular figure, and the marriage was a happy one, producing 4 sons in quick succession, securing the future of the Capetian dynasty. She was living the medieval dream, a beloved queen, a devoted wife, and the mother to a future king. In 1270, Isabella's father-in-law, the legendary King Louis IX, died while on crusade. Her husband ascended the throne as King Philip III, and at just 23 years old, Isabella of Aragon became the Queen of France. This was the pinnacle of power. She was no longer just a princess, she was the matriarch of a kingdom. Her life was a whirlwind of state affairs, religious duties, and raising her young sons, including the heir, the future Philip IV, who would one day be known as Philip the Fair. But the crown was heavy. The French court was a viper's nest of ambition and rivalry. The queen was expected to be a model of virtue and strength, a silent yet powerful influence behind the throne. More than anything, her duty was to produce healthy male heirs, a duty she had already fulfilled. Yet, the pressures were immense. Every action was scrutinized, every word analyzed. She was surrounded by luxury, but also by danger. And the greatest danger of all was not an assassin's dagger or a rival's poison, but a journey she would be forced to take. The year she became queen, 1270, was also the year of the Eighth Crusade. Her devout father-in-law, King Louis IX, had called upon the knights of Europe to once again march on the Holy Land. King Philip, then still a prince, felt obligated to join his father, and as a devoted wife, Isabella accompanied him. It was a disastrous expedition from the start. The crusading army landed in Tunis, North Africa, during the height of summer. Disease ran rampant through the camp. An outbreak of dysentery swept through the army, claiming thousands of lives, including that of the king himself, Louis IX. The crusade collapsed before it even truly began. A grieving Philip, now King Philip III, had no choice but to turn his shattered army around and begin the long, sorrowful journey back to France. The fleet was battered by storms, and the mood was grim. They were not returning as heroes, but as survivors of a catastrophe, carrying the body of their sainted king. And for Queen Isabella, who was once again pregnant, the journey home would become a personal hell. The royal procession made its way from North Africa, across the Mediterranean to Sicily, and then began the arduous overland trek through Italy. This was no royal tour. It was a funeral march on a grand scale. The caravan was laden with the sick, the wounded, and the dead. The new king, Philip, was consumed by grief for his father and the weight of his new responsibilities. Imagine the scene, a long, slow-moving column of knights, nobles, and servants, snaking its way through the rugged winter landscape of southern Italy. The air was cold, the roads were treacherous, and morale was at rock bottom. Queen Isabella, now about 6 months pregnant with her 5th child, was forced to endure these harsh conditions. She was exhausted, grieving, and vulnerable. It was here, in the cold mountains of Calabria, that the fairy tale would come to its brutal, horrifying end. In January of 1271, while crossing the Savuto River near Martorano in Calabria, the unthinkable happened. Isabella's horse stumbled and fell. The accident was sudden and violent. The 23-year-old pregnant queen was thrown to the frozen ground. The fall caused catastrophic internal injuries and triggered a premature, agonizing labor. There, in a makeshift camp far from the comforts and physicians of Paris, Queen Isabella gave birth to a stillborn son. The tragedy was immense, but for Isabella, the suffering was just beginning. The fall had done more than just induce labor, it had caused massive internal trauma. In an age before modern medicine, before surgery, before antibiotics, there was nothing anyone could do. The royal physicians were helpless. All they could do was watch as their queen began to die. This is the part of the story that is almost too gruesome to comprehend. With severe internal injuries and hemorrhaging, Isabella's body was a breeding ground for infection. Gangrene likely began to set in within hours. Her tissues began to die, releasing toxins and bacteria into her bloodstream, a condition we now call sepsis. And with this decay came the smell. It would have started faintly, a sickly sweet odor of corruption that her ladies-in-waiting would have tried to mask with perfumes and incense. But soon, the stench would have become overwhelming, a foul, putrid smell of rotting flesh that no amount of incense could hide. It would have filled the chamber, clinging to the tapestries and the clothes of everyone present. This was the rotting princess. The young, beautiful queen was literally decaying from the inside out, while her mind was still lucid and her heart was still beating. Her body had become a prison of unimaginable pain and horror. For 11 days, Isabella lingered in this agonizing state. Imagine the scene in the royal camp. The new king of France, Philip, was forced to watch his beloved wife suffer and decompose before his very eyes. The royal court, which normally would have been buzzing with gossip and political plotting, was stunned into a horrified silence. No one knew what to say or do. How do you comfort a king whose wife is rotting alive? The stench of death was a physical presence, a constant, sickening reminder of the queen's fate and their own powerlessness. It was a smell that represented the fragility of life, the failure of the crusade, and the wrath of a seemingly cruel god. It wasn't just the smell of her body, it was the metaphorical stench of tragedy that had enveloped the entire French monarchy. The court was silenced not just by grief, but by sheer, unadulterated horror. Isabella of Aragon, Queen of France, died on January 28, 1271. She was just 23 years old. But the horror was not over. King Philip was now faced with a grim task: how to transport the bodies of his wife and his stillborn son hundreds of miles back to France for a proper royal burial. Pre-modern embalming was a crude and often ineffective process. The long journey north through Italy and into France would have been a race against decay. The procession that had started as a funeral march for one king now carried the remains of another, King Louis IX, as well as the rapidly decomposing body of the young queen and her infant son. It was a caravan of death, a spectacle of sorrow that shocked everyone who witnessed it. Finally, months later, Isabella's body reached the Basilica of Saint Denis, the traditional burial place of French monarchs, where she was laid to rest. So what is the legacy of Isabella of Aragon? Her story is a brutal reminder of the realities of the medieval world, where life could be shockingly short and death unimaginably cruel, even for the most powerful people on earth. Her beautiful tomb effigy at Saint Denis gives no hint of the horrifying nature of her death. It depicts a serene, idealized queen, the perfect royal wife and mother. But her true legacy lies in her children. Her son, Philip IV, would grow up to become one of France's most powerful and controversial kings, known as Philip the Fair. It was he who would challenge the papacy, destroy the Knights Templar, and forever change the course of French history. One can only wonder how the memory of his mother's horrific death, a story he would have surely heard as he grew up, shaped the man he became. Her fairy tale was shattered, but the dynasty she secured would go on to rule for centuries. The story of Isabella of Aragon is a chilling footnote in the grand sweep of history. A tale of a bright star that burned out in the most horrific way imaginable. It reminds us that behind the stone effigies and gilded portraits of kings and queens were real people who lived, loved, and suffered in ways we can barely comprehend. The princess who rotted alive was not just a historical curiosity, she was a young woman, a wife, and a mother, whose final days were a nightmare that silenced a kingdom. What do you think is the most shocking part of Isabella's story? Are there other forgotten historical tragedies you think we should cover? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this glimpse into the dark side of history compelling, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and share this video with anyone who loves a tale that history books often leave out. Thanks for watching.